So it was a cold windy night in the ice spikes, and all seemed normal, until a beam of glowing green light struck from the stars above. This beam illuminated the sky in a peculiar display that had never been seen before. But after just a few seconds, the beam had faded, but in its place was a Steve. Now this Steve that had just appeared under that beam was no ordinary Steve, as he wore a green shirt with grey legs, and he had a cape. Also his eyes were emerald. But by far the most important difference was that this Steve, well, he wasn't from this world. In fact, he wasn't even from this universe. Now, even he didn't know how he had just achieved that. But right now, that wasn't something he had the time to dwell on, as there was an ongoing blizzard, and he was just standing there, in the middle of it, doing nothing. And so he needed to act, or else he was at risk of hypothermia. But he had no items on him, and thus he couldn't just build himself a little shelter. No, there was only one logical option: run. And so he ran, and he ran, as fast as his weak legs could take him in this new world. As he had never been to a place with such strong gravity before, and so this was very difficult for him. But still he persevered, and after a short while, he made it to the edge of the ice spikes. However, he wasn't safe just yet, for as soon as he left the icy domain, a new threat emerged: acid rain. Now, it might have looked like normal rain, but no. For Steve, this was clearly acidic rain, as it was burning his skin, causing immense pain for each drop that fell onto him. But luckily, he saw a singular tree that could save him, and so despite the danger, he sprinted through the burning acid and sought cover under that tree. And so, for the next few hours, he just had to stand there and wait for the danger to pass. Now, once that storm was finally over, Steve decided to chop down that tree that had saved him and create a boat out of said wood, as he was right by an ocean, and there was no way that he would be foolish enough to return to that ice spikes biome. For all he knew, another blizzard could occur, and he didn't think he could survive another one. And thus, with years of sailing experience, he got onto that boat and began to venture across the vast oceans. Whether he liked it or not, he was here now, in this new world. He had no choice but to be ready for the great adventures that stood before him. But that was okay, as this world seemed to be lacking any intelligent life, so he would have no opposition in his quest across this new land. And so he sailed for many hours across the great blue seas, until at last he saw it, land. It was a stony shore, and so Steve rowed his boat right alongside that shore before he exited his boat, excited with the possibilities that lay ahead. However, as he leapt to the land, his boat moved back slightly, and thus he was misaligned in his jump, and so he fell into the water. It burned him. It was like that acid rain. He yelled out in searing pain as he lost the ability to move. The pain was all-encompassing, consuming his every thought. There was nothing he could do. This water was killing him. His skin began to literally burn as he started to sink deeper. Soon, he was fully submerged, and the pain was only growing, and so he let out one final yell before he fainted. But eventually, he did wake up, and he found himself at the bottom of the ocean, surrounded by a forest of swaying kelp. He couldn't believe it. He was alive, and he no longer felt as if he was submerged in a pool of boiling acid. He felt strangely at peace. Wait, this felt oddly familiar. Hold on, he knew why. This felt like he was swimming back in his homeworld, where the gravity and the water were different. But then he saw it. All the oceans around him were glowing green. Wait, this didn't feel like the ocean in his homeworld. This was the ocean of his homeworld. And so Steve was just so happy to see that there was something here that he could relate to. And thus he decided to get out of the water so that he could gain a better view of these familiar oceans. And so He climbed up the stony shore and turned around to face the water. It was just so beautiful, and for the first time in several days, he didn't feel so isolated from his home. But regardless of that, he was quite hungry at that point, and so he needed some food. But very luckily for him, he was right next to a forest, and so he ventured within, thinking that food would be quite easy to find within those luscious growths. And well, it was, as just a few seconds later, he found a flock of sheep, and so at the sight of these sheep, he lunged into action and attacked. However, the very moment that his fist contacted the white sheep, its fluffy fur shifted into a lime green hue, and the sheep was poisoned. It began to bleat and spin around in circles before it fell to the ground, dead. Now, that happened to all the sheep within that flock. It was very strange. But regardless, Steve didn't think too much about that. It probably wasn't important. He just collected all their wool and ate all the mutton that he needed. He felt regenerated now, and so with his newfound energy, he decided to just continue exploring through that forest, as he was quite interested to learn about this strange world that he had been teleported to. But rather quickly, he found something very odd. A treehouse. Now, Steve wasn't expecting that, as he truly didn't believe that there was any intelligent life here, but clearly there must be. Someone had built that house. However, upon closer examination, it became painfully clear that the treehouse was long abandoned, as cobwebs covered all surfaces, the wood was rotting, and everything was very untidy. Whoever, or whatever built this, clearly hadn't been back in a very long time. So, it was rather fair to assume they were probably long dead now. But still, Steve continued to venture across the treehouse, trying to find any other hidden hints about the history of this house. And soon he found himself on the top floor. It was mostly empty, but in the center of the floor was a set of pristine iron armor. It was glowing in the sun. Steve took a few steps closer, when he realized that he could see his reflection in it. But he was horrified with what he saw. His skin had all melted away, and the green hues of the ocean had stained his muscles green. The compression of the ocean, when he had fainted, had created everlasting shadows upon his form. He couldn't believe it. He was hideous, and so he began to lose sanity. How could this have happened to him? He should never have looked like this. He's a monster. But trying to calm himself down, he made the decision to just look over the ocean, as it was just such a beautiful view from this treehouse. But as he did that, he saw these floating bodies on the surface of the ocean. Wait, those were poisoned. This stressed him out even more. What was going on right now? Wait a second. He suddenly understood what was happening. His oceans are acidic within this universe, and the oceans here are acidic to him, as he was only used to the water from his universe. The two universes just aren't compatible. So that's why the rain hurt him, and why the ocean almost killed him, and why the water here was acidic to him. But he had somehow polluted this world's oceans to be like his homeland. That must be why when he attacked those sheep, he was toxic to them, as he was covered in his oceans, which the beings of this world just couldn't handle, just like how he couldn't handle the oceans of this world. The worlds were just incompatible. That must also be why all those sea creatures were dead and were just floating on the water. He was an acidic being for this world, as his entire form was a skin of acid, and thus he gave himself the name AcidSkinned. But still, he was alive and stable, and there was nothing really that he could do to improve his appearance or change the circumstances going on right now. And so there was no real use in worrying about that right now. He would be far better off directing his attention to more productive thoughts, such as finding other intelligent life, as there should still be some around in this world, right? This house was built by one, so they must exist, and maybe, just maybe, if he could find some intelligent life, he could ask them to restore him to his former appearance, and to then help him return home to his universe. That was a great plan that couldn't possibly fail, and so he set off into the wilderness, ready to find those other intelligent beings. Now throughout his journey, whenever he needed to satisfy his hunger, he would just approach a flock of sheep and gently touch them. This would then cause his toxic presence to be passed on to those sheep, which would turn them all green and poison them. As then, once they were dead, he would eat the raw flesh of those beings and use the energy to carry on with his adventures. Now randomly on his travels, he placed down some of those lime wall blocks that he collected, marking his path in case he ever got lost. Also, as he walked on, the toxic aura of the AcidSkinned spread into the ground, polluting all the water in a 20,000 block radius into the toxic green sludge of his homeland. So AcidSkinned walked on for days and days, across the barren expanse of the desert, and through the luscious embrace of the jungle, and even over the magical subscribe button flower forests, until he finally found it. Intelligent life. He had stumbled upon a tiger village, and so excited with the prospect of finding intelligent life, AcidSkinned strolled right into that town, ready to ask the beings here for help. As they did seem rather intelligent, they had built their own towns and created a society. However, as soon as the villagers saw him, they all began to run away and hide in their homes. AcidSkinned was confused. Why were they all running away from him? He wasn't that appalling. Was he? Well, before he could find out, an iron golem was sent to deal with him. AcidSkinned was scared. He had never seen such a mechanical marvel, but before the iron golem could attack him, he fell victim to his toxic aura and collapsed to the ground. All that could be heard in that village were the hysterical cries for help. No one had ever killed an iron golem without touching it, and so the villagers thought that this was it. This was the beginning of the end. This monster was going to kill them all. But AcidSkinned, unaware of this attitude, just began to walk towards the houses of those villagers with a smile on his face, excited to meet them. However, just as he was about to walk into one of those houses, he accidentally stepped on a campfire. That hurt, and so he jumped back in pain. But by then, it was too late. He had already made that campfire acidic, and thus, the smoke it emitted turned green and was now toxic. As the smoke from that campfire reached the trees around it, it set them ablaze. The toxic particles caused the trees to become unstable and combust. Very soon, there was a giant fire. The village was engulfed in flames. AcidSkinned had no idea that he had just caused this, as he just saw that there was a looming danger, and thus he ran away and went to go and find the next village, thinking that hopefully they would be a bit nicer, and that they wouldn't set their own village on fire just to attack him and get him away. Now, most of those villagers would die in that fire, because unlike what AcidSkinned thought, they didn't cause that fire, he did, and they were the ones that suffered because of it. But still, some would survive, probably because they used the power of the subscribe button to lead them to safety. But anyways, those that lived would then dedicate their lives to travelling the world, warning other villagers of the dangers of the AcidSkinned. Now, many other villagers were somewhat aware of his incoming visits due to the random lime wool that would start to appear, or the water turning a glowing green hue. Now, whenever AcidSkinned entered a village, disaster would always strike, without fail, and most would die. Typically, a fire would start somehow and would engulf the entire village, or maybe AcidSkinned would just go near their food supply, and due to his toxic aura, everyone would be poisoned and would be dead in a mere few hours. Something bad would always happen, and AcidSkinned foolishly believed that all these strange destructive occurrences were actually the villagers' doings, as he believed that they were doing all this to get away from him, and he believed that they were the fools for doing that. They were just causing their own sufferings, because once again, AcidSkinned was blind to the fact that he was causing all this. And so, as these deadly interactions became increasingly common, hate for AcidSkinned began to fester in the hearts of all the villagers. They wanted him gone. But meanwhile to that, something very strange happened. AcidSkinned found a ruined portal. He knew what that was. He had seen some of those in his homeworld, and so he filled in the gaps and lit the portal. And then he entered it and travelled to the Nether. He believed that maybe there could be some actual intelligent life there in this universe's Nether, unlike those foolish villagers who just self-destructed every single time he just tried to greet them. Now, a young villager child saw this happen, and he told all the other villagers in his home village about what he saw. And so, very quickly, news of this portal opening up and how the AcidSkinned travelled through it spread across the village's civilization, and eventually word even reached one small group of adventurers. Now, this group had been hunting the AcidSkinned for quite some time, so when they learned of this other dimension they had gone to, they knew what they had to do. They had to go get him, and so they were the only villagers who were brave enough to get onto their horses and ride out into the distance in order to make a portal to this hell dimension. Now, they had experience with other toxic beings, such as a skull, and they had the perfect plan to summon the AcidSkinned, as they held some very special red candles that they hoped would attract this monster. And so, they were ready. But to learn what happened next, you'll need to watch this video.